Hi, this is the Lute channel, and today we have another podcast. In this podcast, we speak with lutenists about lutes, about early music, and anything else we want. Today, I have here with me Marc Lewon. Thanks a lot for coming, Marc.
My pleasure, my pleasure. Great to be here, thank you.
Tell me a little bit how you started with music.
In general?
In general,
Absolutely
yeah.
in general.
Absolutely in general, yeah.
Okay, I'd
Where are you from? And yeah.
Yeah, I grew up near Frankfurt in Germany,
Yeah.
just a bit south of Frankfurt. Rottgau is the place name, and my mother supported the idea of music making as a child. So I got xylophone lessons in the very beginning. When I was 6, it was called musikalische Früherziehung. I remember that very faintly.
Was that like off method or something like this?
Was that what?
The off method, like musicalization.
I wouldn't even know. I wouldn't even remember.
Yeah.
Could be.
Maybe,
it was
yeah.
mainly, I think, to learn musical notation.
Yeah, with pentatonic scales or like that. Yeah,
with colored notes.
Nice.
Whatever. You know, that was so long ago. I don't remember.
Yeah, of course.
And then at some point I wanted to pick up an instrument, and I wanted the guitar. I was interested in the guitar, classical guitar. And it took a bit, I think, until I got one, and then it's quite late. I think for my 11th birthday, there was a guitar under the tree. I still have that one. It now resides at my sister's place.
Awesome.
Every time I go there, I pick that one, the old one, up just to play some tunes from back then.
So very early on, you wanted to play classical guitar already.
Yeah. I remember.
That's not so common. That's not so
Yeah, I then
That's
got
very nice.
for a few months there was nothing. I just tried out something and was of course hopeless. And then I finally got a teacher who was the father of a friend, of a school friend, Hans Per-Sonat was his name, and I had lessons with him for maybe 2 years or so. Not much more, maybe 3. I'm not entirely sure. And then somehow that stopped, and back then I didn't know why. So over one summer he had given me some picker studies. It was called picker studies with a little LP in it. It was a little one, so not an LP, but you know.
Yeah, I know this one. Yeah.
So you could listen to the pieces and you could see the notation, and I learned all of them by heart and presented them afterwards. And then at some point I didn't get any more lessons. Didn't know why. And it was only a few years back that my old school friend Hans had died in the meantime already. This old school friend Guido Per-Sonat at some point told me that his father wanted me to go to the conservatory and thought he couldn't teach me anymore. But I think maybe at home that didn't ring too well, or so somehow I just didn't have any more lessons, turns out. But also my interests wandered a bit. I did a bit of accordion then. Don't tell anyone. Okay, too late.
Too late, and everybody knows that. Well, it's awesome. In our interview with Sam plays the concertina.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and I have a concertina. I love concertinas. The sound, so you are at home.
Okay,
not a problem. Yeah.
So it was just trying out. I think back then what I wanted to do was something special or strange instruments. There was no option of doing early music.
Yeah. How old were you at that time?
14, 15,
okay.
I think, around that time.
Yeah.
And of course we're talking the 80s. Yeah? So no internet. You couldn't just look something up or find your interest. You'd have to have someone who does it, or you'd have to listen to it somewhere on the radio and then be interested and drawn there or something. So lutes were completely
another world.
It existed, of course, but I didn't get access to that. So I didn't know it was around. I didn't know of its existence, so to speak. Or you'd had seen some pictures and knew that's a lute, but there is no chance that I would get in contact with that in any way somehow. So guitar was the main instrument of choice, and then I went to the United States for an exchange year with my wonderful host family in the States, the Carlsons.
Mm-hmm.
And there my musical interest was actually furthered because they had a piano at home, and I could take piano lessons at school.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden I started piano with 16 or so. So I didn't get that far, but I did some piano. And they had some recordings, and amongst them were a cassette tape with lute duos. Imagine that. And one with harpsichord music. And this was really the first time I got into closer contact with early music.
Do you remember who was playing?
I don't, but a few years back, I was, you know, when you get a bit older, you start looking back and wonder, what was that?
Yeah, yeah.
So I actually wrote to my host mother, Kay, if she remembered what that was, what recordings those were. And she actually managed to look it up and told me the lute one was with Paul Odette. Imagine that, you know. So years later, I go like, I already listened to the best back then.
Yeah,
that was wonderful, and that followed me around for a bit. So kind of in the background, but it wasn't really an option for me. And then when I got back, I started my civil service. I wanted to do something in the area of environmental protection or so. I knew there were some spaces there. So I looked around, I heard something. That's what you do back then. Of course, you can't Google it. You know? You talk to people. Someone heard over there is something that... And then you just pick up the phone, like that. Auskunft, you know, the information, where you get phone numbers. You call them and say, there's a bird station somewhere in blah blah blah, could you give me the telephone number? They said, okay, we have here that and that. Gave me the telephone number. I called them up. It was a stork station, so to raise storks. And I went there. I made my driver's license in the States, so I could already drive with 17. In Germany. That's not normal. Normally you have to be 18. Yeah. And I had my own little car that I got from a friend, and went down there for an interview and got the job. It was magical. So for 1.5 years, I was raising storks. I was chopping wood. You know, it was was attached to the forest office, to the forestry. What do you call that? Forstamt.
Yeah.
Whatever.
I don't know how to say it.
And that was an old. So the forestry was in a former castle, little castle. Mm-hmm. And we were just next to them, around woods and fields around, and the birds. And so I was surrounded by nature and history, and all that stirred something. That happened when I was 18. So 18, 19, I think. So I think that did something. And in that time, I started picking up the lute again. I went to some medieval markets and got inspired. I wanted to do what they do, the music. I wanted to learn more about that music that they were playing there. So I got some editions of Dowland for guitar. That to me was medieval or early in that time. So I started playing all that stuff. Really got into it, started taking organ lessons, went to the church nearby and practiced organ there. I started taking violin lessons. Did music all around while being in the nature and close to historical surroundings somehow.
That's so interesting.
That inspired me to go, and I want to do something early. I got to know some people back then who played on the medieval markets, and they have had an ensemble, a group, a music group, and they invited me in, and I got some contacts that way, and everything's history. I went.
But you got a lute in that time.
I didn't get a lute. What I got was a lute guitar. Guitar,
I know,
lute, Gitarrenlaute, that thing. And someone had told me, that's the real thing.
Of course,
I said, are you sure? It plays exactly like a guitar, and it's got these metal frets. I'm not sure. Yeah. So I bought it.
Had it already double strings or simple strings?
No, single strings.
Single strings, yeah.
And I thought, that can't be right. So I had my doubts, but, I couldn't look it up. I didn't have anybody to check with.
Yeah, of course.
It was just on a whim, and it was 19, So after the civil service, I thought, why not study music? That wasn't so well received. Instead I thought, okay, I might start organ constructing. So I do something practical connected to music. So I started 3 months of becoming an organ builder.
I had no idea.
Yeah. how would you? I mean, that was but it was interesting yet again.
Yeah,
it was an interesting episode, but I felt it's not for me. You know, this 9 to 5 job every day in the workshop. I mean, they're doing fantastic work, but somehow I kind of felt I need to play. I want to play something. And then I quit and immediately felt relieved and thought, I want to go to Heidelberg, the city nearby, where I had the stock station was quite near Heidelberg. So I knew that city. It had this historical aura. I wanted to study in an historical atmosphere, soak all that in. And I wanted to study the lute because someone had already pointed me to the lute at that time.
Okay.
Someone I still know who lives here in Basel.
And was there a lute teacher or a lute course there?
There was a lute teacher, Johannes Vogt. He's still playing. He's still around. That's great. Great guy. And I just, again, someone told me, there's this man in Heidelberg who teaches lute at the Musikhochschule there. And I just called him up. I found the number. I found a number of Vogts. I called them all up. And then finally, are you the Vogt who's a lute player? Yeah, okay, there you go. That's how you did it back then. And then he said, yeah, I could come by. He knows someone who's selling a 6 course. I might try it out, maybe buy it. At some point he calls me back. Yeah, it's there. It costs that and that much money. For me, a huge amount of money back then, of course. So I borrowed that money from my mother. She just gave it to me very kindly. And I drove there and he gave me the lute. I handed him the money and he gave me a lesson how to read tablature. And he gave me a book that I copied. This is tablature. Aha, how does it work? Okay, you do this, you do that. Okay. So I went back to my father's place where I then lived after I had finished just for a few months after I had finished the stock station stuff. Went into the cellar for a month and practiced reading that tablature. So after a month I could read it. It took, you know how it is, but it didn't take so long. You know, if you do it every day, after a few weeks you have it. You know? That's
the point of tablature, to be accessible.
Yeah, absolutely. So knowing that, I went back to Heidelberg and had 1 or 2 lessons with him where he gave me some advice on technique, how to hold it, how to play it. I practiced and then I wanted to start studying with him in Heidelberg, study lute. That was the plan. So I moved to Heidelberg, rented a room, practiced real hard, practiced some ear training. I had some cassette tapes. You had to pass an extensive normal Musikhochschule entrance exam, you know, the classical thing. And then I went there, I played the lute. I got a 1.0, which is like admitted, no problem.
That's the opposite from Switzerland.
Yeah, it's the opposite. It's the opposite.
So people know.
I played the piano. I had to play the piano also. It was also, okay, as a secondary instrument. And then I did the theory exam and entirely blew it. So, and I mean, it was out of the world stuff. And I didn't have any experience really. And they played random chords. You had to write what chord that is and stuff. No idea, something dissonant, you know.
It's practice. If you don't practice it's like anything. You have to practice it.
And that's the problem in Germany also with the musical education. They don't teach you that. You know, you have to go to specific courses if you want to go in that direction too. But you don't get it in normal courses, in normal classes. You just don't get it. So I had to catch up on all of that. So and then I couldn't be admitted because it was just the theory was just too bad. And then I thought, oh man, so do I topple all that? Do I do the original plan, which was study physics or Maschinenbau? I majored in physics and maths when I was in school. So that was originally the idea that I would do physics or astrophysics or something like that. Do I cancel everything? I said, no, I'm staying here in Heidelberg. I'll enroll in Musikwissenschaft, in musicology. I'll study that. I'll study the theory and do it again next year. So I enrolled there in the musicological department of the University of Heidelberg. And I started taking history as the secondary. I started to take art history as another secondary subject. Then I saw, the German department has extensive medieval studies. You can study Middle High German, Old High German, Middle High German literature, Minnesang, all that sort of. I thought, wow, that's fascinating. So at some point I changed to German as my second subject, and I really got into the whole thing. So after a year or so, I thought, I should finish this. I should, keep studying musicology, make a degree, get a degree, finish that. In the meanwhile, I needed to earn money. So I already had this contact with these medieval market groups, and they actually took me on board, and I started playing on the medieval markets and medieval banquets, or what you call them, Rittermahl, all this sort of stuff. And that was fairly quick money, actually. You do an evening of entertainment, you play something that to them sounds medieval, and you get, I got a month's room rent out of a gig.
That's very good. That's very good.
Yeah. So
that was already like the 90s?
Yeah, we're talking the 90s now. We're talking 94 to 98 about that time. So I toured the medieval markets in the summer and did sort of some banquets and stuff and some weddings, and you dress up, you're in costume.
Yeah. I've done this all.
And it was great fun, It's nothing I'm embarrassed about. It was.
It's nice. It's
and
fun.
What you get is stage presence. Yeah, you learn everything by heart. You do arrangements. You just go out there. You blast the thing. You do the stuff. You need to draw a crowd in. You learn how to stand on stage and get people in. Come listen to us. Blah blah blah. We'll play to you. At the very beginning, I felt underprepared. I didn't feel quite actually ready to do this sort of thing yet. And so it's kind of fake it till you make it. That thing. That happened for a long time. That I felt, we as a group or so aren't actually ready to do this yet, but you have to go out there and do it, and you get a lot of practice that way, and also to focus on what's important, what's not so important in this moment. I mean, I'm sure we didn't sound super great on stage, but it was a good atmosphere, and some things are more important than others in certain circumstances. You need to be loud, you need to do some, have fun, engage people.
In the end, and then you start to learn what works, what doesn't work, and
exactly. You try out things, and you also fail with some things. Some things just don't work. At some point, you have to go like, let's not do that.
We tried that. Let's not do it.
Exactly. So it was a good time though. So I toured a lot, and I continued studying musicology.
So in Germany, doing this kind of festivals and medieval fairs.
Exactly.
Okay. And still doing the musicology in German literature from that time.
And German literature. So musicology and German literature. At some point then I did my master's degree. I had to write a thesis and go through all the tests as you do. So I have my master's degree in musicology and medieval German studies, focusing on medievistic, on medieval studies in both. But I had to, of course, cover the whole thing in Musikwissenschaft, in musicology, as you do. And wrote my thesis there and got my degree. And by that time, I was already asked by another group to play with them. And they were a group who already played concerts. This is the Freiburger Spielleute I'm talking about. And that for me was a huge step. All of a sudden, they saw me on stage on a medieval market, but they were playing a concert there for that same occasion. They saw me, and a week later I get a call, and they say, we are from the Freiburg, we'd like to try you out. And I was like, wow, And I went there, I played with them, rehearsed with them a bit, and then they decided, they want me to have me in one of their concert programs. I said, sure. And from then on, for 10 years, I was a member of that group.
Nice.
And had a lot of concerts, I mean, the approach was a bit more folk-like, if you will. Not maybe as historically informed as we would do it elsewhere, but it was a great experience, a good group, also friends. It was really, really nice to be with them. We had so much fun. And again, I learned a lot by doing that, and we played more polyphonic music, a bit more complicated music, whereas before we mainly did monophony or other genres. And and again, that was also a source where I would earn my keep. At the same time, I was already together with my later wife, who still is my wife, Gabriele. We got together when I was in Heidelberg, and she also helped a lot, I must say, with the to keep the whole thing running. You know how it is with money, and when you're reliant on only self-employed work. So it's not always working. Sometimes you have a low, and then you need some support.
There's no stability.
Yes, and she was always supportive of that, and always helped out. So that kind of kept me going.
Yeah.
Because at some point you might consider, should I continue doing this? You earn so little, you learn more and more. It's interesting, it's nice, but you.
It gets to a point that you have to really think for yourself, is this worth it? Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah. And then the Freiburger Spielleut suggested I should go study at the Schola. Yeah. So that is already quite late. I've already been playing for 5, 6, 7 years on market stuff, did the musicological studies. And then to say, okay, I actually should go back to the lute, actually study it, but now medieval lute at the Schola. So I went there, met Crawford Young, talked to him, and then did the entrance exam and got in, and that really changed everything for me. All of a sudden, I was in a place where everything that I desperately wanted to learn and which was so hard to get to and get information,
you could
it
find
was
in
all
a
there.
place. Yeah.
It was all there. And I thought, I went to my first ensemble class, and there was an ensemble of 4 singers. I still know who they are. Singing Dufay chanson, and I was like, that's it. That's the stuff I wanted to do. Yeah, wow.
Incredible.
So that to me was fantastic. So I studied the lute with Crawford then, plectrum lute.
Were you playing already with plectrum, or
I was occasionally. I was on the medieval markets. You don't know what I was playing. All sorts of things. I had a saz with plectrum. I had an oud I tried a bit around with. I played the nickel harpa, bowed instrument with keys. A bit of the fiddle from my violin lessons back then, which I only had for a year.
A true medieval man.
I played the shawm badly, but I did. I'm embarrassed to say. There's still pictures there with me playing the shawm. And sang, of course. Yeah, that's what you do. You kind of do everything. And then I focused a bit more on the lute again. So I had that lute still, and I practiced finger lute and with the plectrum. And then really focused. Once I studied with Crawford, I really focused on the plectrum lute. I bought another lute that Crawford had commissioned. I bought it. It's still my main lute. That one.
Awesome.
Learned the technique from him, what the plectrums he used, and.
And you stayed studying with him in Schola for how much time?
That was the diploma studies, as they were called back then. It was 4 years. And then I had one more year because I had a second studies in fiddle, but I could only start after 2 years. And I had another additional year just focusing on the fiddle and doing an Abschluss there without diploma.
Nice.
In the fiddle.
Nice.
So I moved out of Basel to Grenzach, Grenzach-Wielen.
Which is like the border to Basel,
Just outside on the German side. Yeah. And I started just trying to now pick up life as a freelance musician, having studied properly.
That's like beginning of 2000s.
No, we're talking 2006 now.
2006, okay.
And so built up, I started the Ensemble Leones. That started in 2008 or 2009. I think we officially started. And that it then took years, of course, to take off. We recorded a CD and tried to get gigs. It took many years to start rolling, but then it did. Finally, it did.
It takes time. People sometimes do not realize that, especially now that everything is so fast and you want things for yesterday. Yeah, that these kind of things takes time to build up.
You need perseverance.
Yeah.
So it's you think, when I started playing with the own ensemble, I founded that ensemble and thought, now I have my own ensemble, let's play, let's get concerts. you contact organizers where you've already played with other ensembles.
Yeah.
You know, you've been there multiple times. You go, I've got my own thing now.
Yeah.
Here, hire me. And, tumbleweed, nothing.
Crickets.
Crickets in the background.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
and that it's normal.
Yeah.
You're a new player
Yeah.
on the board, and you need to prove yourself. It takes time, so you can't actually latch on to other successes in that way, in that same way, which again I had to learn there. So that took several years to really take off. And at some point I thought, if I want to ever continue with the musicological side of things, like doing a PhD, this maybe would be the moment where it's kind of in a low. I had stopped playing with Freiburger Spielleute and with some ensembles. I wanted to do more my own things now.
Yeah.
And this would be the moment, maybe because there was not so much going on to
do the PhD.
So I applied to Oxford University because I thought, if I do that, I want to do it in a special place. I don't want to do it on the side somewhere. I want to go also to a great person, Reinhard Strom, who was my supervisor then in Oxford. I was admitted there. I got some funding from the DAAD, the German Academic Exchange Service, something like that. And I went to Oxford and started a PhD there. That took a long time because eventually the ensemble started to take off and I was playing all the time and I couldn't do the PhD. So I took extension after extension, and finally after 6 years, so I did a half-time PhD really. I finished the thesis, which is online. You can get, it's not printed. I only have like 6 exemplars like that.
That's like really cool. That you cannot see anything from here, but let me just put at least the title.
Yeah, you can find that online as a download, as a PDF. So it's available.
Transformational practices in 15th century German music.
Yeah, so finally that happened. Yeah, and other ensembles were formed around that time that I'm still playing with. Baptiste's ensemble, miroir, musique. Yeah, so that's great, and started playing with other groups like Sabine Lutzenberger's ensemble Per-Sonat and Agnieszka Budzinska-Bennett's ensemble Peregrina. And we have another one with Jane Achtmann, Dragma. So there's a number of new ensembles then formed or in the 2010s now.
Here we have also several CDs from Marc, and like are they all from Leones?
These are all Leones CDs right now. I mean, we have some more, but I brought a few. But
only here there's already 5.
That's already 5. I think I'm not sure. I'm 7 or 8, something like that. Another one is in the make right now. But.
So, Amine Zinger and his Veil of Tears, songs and interludes.
That was one of the first.
Yeah. That's what. Yeah, I'm going in the I think in the chronological order.
Yeah, that was a Minnesang CD. This actually went back to my master's thesis from the musicological studies in Heidelberg, where I was focusing on the earliest musical transmission to the Minnesinger Neidhardt. I did
2010.
And this one was then the second CD we did. The first one was on Josquin de Pré, but I didn't bring it now.
Argentum et Aurum, musical treasures from the early Habsburg Renaissance.
Yeah. That one came out of a research project I did as part of my work with Reinhard Strom. We did a research project in Vienna, and we did recordings for that. It's online. You'll find that online. That research project, and out of that we could then put together the musical examples we recorded into a CD, and that one actually won an ICMA.
I was going to say, like, award-winning CD. The Cosmopolitan, songs by Oswald von Wolkenstein.
Yeah, that is another project dear to my heart, with music from German music from the early 15th century.
Colors in the Dark, the instrumental music of Alexander Agricola.
Inspired really by Crawford Young also, who is an absolute Agricola fan and who got me on that path. Yeah.
And Two Lutes with Grace. Is there a part of Ensemble Leones also? That's something.
It's not Ensemble Leones officially, but it's
plectrum lute duos.
It's just such
the
a
late
small
15th
ensemble.
Century.
Yeah. Yeah. So this is with Paul, my duo partner Paul Kiefer, and here this is maybe the most lutey of my productions. The lute duo of the 15th century, 2 plectrum lutes playing in duo with diminutions and stuff. So that was. Especially again inspired, of course, by Crawford, who was working on that sort of stuff for a long time.
That's great. So you stayed in Grenza since already. You're still there until today?
Yeah, we moved within the town, but we're still in Grenza.
In Grenza. Yeah. So you started out your group and your PhD, and then at some point you became the teacher of lute in Schola.
When Crawford retired, that position was advertised, and of course, naturally,
How many years is that already?
That was the advertisement of the position was in 2016.
Okay.
And I got the position, and I started in 2017.
17. That's already 5 years.
Imagine that.
Yeah, it's already 5 years.
Time goes by.
I remember when it happened.
I do too.
I'm sure you do. I'm sure. It seems like not so long ago.
Yeah, to me
it's
it's
5 years.
Yeah.
And how's it been?
Oh, it's great. It's absolutely fantastic. And what I enjoy especially about this is I have a lute class, so lute lessons and intabulation lessons, so stuff that is really lute oriented. But at the same time, I also have some theory classes like Crawford did. I mean, Crawford had an all-round position when he was teaching. He was teaching certain bits of music history, musicus and cantor, called, and performance practice. So looking at sources of medieval performance practice, iconography and all that. And I could take over some of these classes. So I'm teaching also theory to the entire medieval class, which is nice because you get to see everyone, not only the lute players, but also the singers and the fiddle players. Everyone is there. And we also have an ensemble class, so where then singers, lutenists, harps, fiddles play together, and you work on the interpretation of music rather than specifically on lute. So I have both worlds, and I love that. I love the combination.
Yeah, that's incredible. That sounds very nice. And well, for early music in general, it's already a field that's quite connected with research, or if you want to have an historical approach to it. And you already, of course, you have a big history of research also. So it makes sense to combine everything, and that sounds really, really nice. And just to clarify, so in Schola you have like the lute is divided into departments. So you have the medieval Renaissance and Renaissance romantic.
Baroque, really.
Baroque,
Yes.
So that's also a curiosity that I have. In your lute journey, have you ever played other lute instruments that were not medieval Renaissance instruments, or from the beginning, that's what I want to do and focus?
I always really wanted to focus on the early. At the beginning, even, I mean, when I still played the guitar, I didn't know how early you could go. So I was looking at John Dowland and that kind of repertoire. But as soon as I knew how early you can go, I wanted to go early and earlier, as early as I can, really. We're talking 12th century, 13th century. What do you do with a lute then? So that was a huge journey there. And I've really focused on medieval first, and then Renaissance again. So it came back again. And I'm going maybe until 1600 at the most. Probably.
That's top.
That's pretty much top. Yeah. I've at some point I had a chitarrone at home, which I managed to knock about quite a bit, and that wasn't for me. Just too big. I put it away again. That wasn't my world. I thought other people do that really well. Let them do it. I'll focus on the smaller lutes, and the largest lute I have is a 7-course. Yeah, but yeah,
that's very practical.
It is. Well, the largest is actually a tenor lute in E, so it's large, but it's a 6-course. So I don't really go beyond 7 courses. I used to have a 10-course at some point, but that didn't agree with me.
Yeah,
it was too much like a harp down there.
Too many courses. No, that's interesting, because that's sometimes it's a difficult, because I don't know, we have so many lutes for so many centuries with so many different repertoire, and everything is nice, everything is beautiful, and you want to do, it's like, I would love to take like I don't know how many months and just to take Baroque lute and play Weiss, but it's such a different world from Renaissance lute and from Theobo and medieval lute, the plectrum. That's another story, completely different. Do you think we are going? This has also been a topic here, that we are going to specialize each time more, like on different instruments, because right now I don't even medieval Renaissance. That's already quite a lot, and Renaissance, Baroque. And if you go like to the almost gallant music, like the Baroque lute, the German lute, that's already like Renaissance, Baroque, classical. It's so much. And you expect one person to be able to deal with all of this. Yeah. And how do you think it's going to go?
Yeah, I think what we need in teaching specifically is focus and more specific. As a player, I'd say it's important to also dabble in other areas. So to focus on certain things, but to also take on board things on the side. Yeah, to broaden your perspective. I've always profited from that and loved it also. I dabble in something that I'm not really so good in, so I don't maybe not put that on stage, but I try something with it. And I think you absolutely should. And you also tried the plectrum, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. I did.
So that's good, I think. Because it broadens the horizon. And maybe you can do something with it to a certain degree and focus on something else more thoroughly. But absolutely, I think you should broaden. But in teaching, it's good, I think, to be able to
focus.
And as you said, medieval Renaissance, that's already quite large. It's huge. Of course, when we're going early into the Middle Ages, we are lacking the repertoires. No? We are lacking lute-specific repertoires. So we have repertoires, musical repertoires, and we then need to find a way with the lute, with it, which is a huge gray area. But sometimes we can be surprised how much we can actually learn about.
Of course.
And figure out. Of course, it's going to be individual. Everybody is going to find an individual way towards making a certain repertoire work.
That's one of the main things. Especially when you do more medieval stuff, or when you're going to rehearse a medieval piece. It's not like Telemann, where every instrument is there specified. This works very well for this instrument, very well for this instrument. You have like sometimes a 3-voice piece, and then it takes a very big time just to decide in which pitch you're going to play, which instruments are going to play each line, because everything is possible. And this is a big part of this kind of music, that if you take the same composer or the same pieces in different ensembles, it's going to sound completely different, much more different than 2-3 different CDs with Mozart, Beethoven, Telemann, or Bach, or whatever. The differences will be in the details. But with this kind of music, it's gigantic differences. Because of the liberty that you have, because you have less information about it, you have to be a bit more creative in the information that you have, which is also very, very, which makes so nice and so interesting to do this music, because you put a lot of yourself.
Absolutely, yeah. There's so much additional work going into it. As you said, it's not only making decisions, but it's also maybe intabulating, finding your diminutions, or an idiomatic way of putting a certain piece onto the instrument. So something that the players of that time did themselves all the time. So they took existing music and put it on the instrument, intabulated it, if you will, or made their own personal versions out of it. And we have a few windows into that world of performance or practice at that time that we need to expand. So we need to, what we can do is we can study these little windows that we have into the practice and try to expand that in the style and make it our own. That's our huge task. But I'm not talking only about, we're not talking about lutes only. Yeah, so my position, it was originally actually named, now it's called, I think, plectrum lute or medieval and early Renaissance music lute or something like that. Originally it was called, when it was advertised, Lauteninstrumente des Mittelalters und der frühen Neuzeit. So lute instruments of the Middle Ages and the early Renaissance, you could say.
Early modern time.
Early modern era.
Era.
So, but what does it mean? Lute instruments. That doesn't mean that means that includes other instruments besides the lute, or what we know as the lute. Thinking of citterns, cetre, citoles.
All the cousins.
All the cousins, gitterns, all instruments that basically are plectrum plucked chordophones with a neck. So you need to, because plucked instruments can also be harps or psalteries, but here we are talking about those that you fret. So fretted, plectrum plucked string instruments. It's in the Middle Ages we have a huge range of those. And if we include all those into our studies or teachings, we need to figure out how to make them, build them first and foremost. There's still a lot of research to be done and tried out practically, and we are doing that. So I got a cetra reconstructed.
I saw the video. It's so amazing. It's so amazing. Was it Julian that did?
Julian made that. Julian Beer.
That's really incredible.
Made that cetra.
It's so beautiful.
Vergine Madre Pia, a te s'inclini ognun divotamente, sì che il cuore la mente, come l'angel sempre dica Ave Maria. Madre de Cristo, Vergine beata, Immaculata Stella mattutina, tu sei sopra gli angeli esaltata, in te incarno la maestà divina, tu sei di grazia plena. Gabriel disse quando te gramnave, porta del cielo e chiave, sopra ogni donna benedetta sia. Vergine Madre Pia, a te s'inchini ognun divotamente, sì che il cuore la mente, come l'angel sempre dica Ave Maria. Alza gli occhi pietosi alquanto mira, i santi preghi di questa tua terra, con le man giunte a te ognor sospira, che mandi pace a noi da cielo in terra, con i figli all'aspra guerra, concedendo la Chiesa al pastor santo e il popol tutto quanto salvarsi possa sotto sua bailiva, Vergine Madre pia, a te s'inchini ognun divotamente, sì che il cuore la mente, l'angel sempre dica Ave Maria.
Yeah, it's so.
You can diversify so much, and for all these instruments, you need to figure out what was their usage, probably their probable application. How would you play it? For what would you play it? Do you play it to accompany monophonic song? Do you use it as a part in polyphony? Can you play soloistic polyphony on it, or imitate or give the impression of soloistic polyphony, even though you cannot portray all the polyphonic lines on that instrument? So all that sort of stuff you need to answer, figure out, find a technique to play it. It's a huge task, and we need many people to do the work. This can't be done by one person. But we can start making paths inwards,
of course.
try things out. Got a citole reconstructed as well, so a 14th century instrument. And trying my way with it, trying to figure out what can you do with it? How could it have been used?
All these musical implications, can you find like sources that talk like clearly about it, or no?
Hardly. Sometimes they're mentioned, you have images, you have pictures. For the citoles, we have some scant information in payrolls of the 14th century, so that a certain citola to the king, so they were noble musicians, citola to the king was granted a certain amount of money for a certain service at some point, and you can then only guess, but you
what
know
they
already
really played and how they played.
But you see, for instance, for the citole, you see illustrations, illuminations in manuscripts where they are dancing themselves and they are leading a dance. So you can assume, okay, that instrument was probably used to play dance music. You get the citole mentioned in trouvère songs, in the lighter trouvère song repertoires that are also a bit dance-like. So you could assume that maybe accompanying certain lighter trouvère songs could have been done on the citole. So that sort of information we have. We have pictures, we have references here and there that paint a picture. And bit by bit we get inroads in the usage, and then we need to try out. We need to put it on stage, figure out, and you'll notice some things work really well, other things don't work so well. And
that's the whole early music thing. In the end, it's like going to the sources and trying to see what fits, what works, and we're inventing a new way of doing. In the end, we have a very informed way of inventing ourselves. A
very historically informed way of making modern or new music.
That's a very good. Now it's historically inspired and not historically informed. It's already a bit too much. It's inspired.
Big caveat. But we can learn so much about the culture, the musical culture, but also generally the societal culture of those times, and we can figure out what were the parameters of aesthetics, and we can try to cater to them. We can try to update them into our life, into our times. So it's always, you can never get it exactly right, and maybe you don't want to, because our hearing has changed so much that it wouldn't even work. But what we are trying to do is make the music work on its own terms to a certain degree, not trying to pull it screaming into the 21st century, but to try to approach it in such a way that the music can speak out of itself rather than being
transformed
transformed in a way
an
that
artificial way, let's say,
something completely different.
I understand.
But there's still such a huge gray area and space for so many people with their approaches, which is beautiful, I find.
There is recently a new concert series here in Basel that's called ReRenaissance. Can you talk a bit about this?
That's a great initiative by Elisabeth Stählin, who started the whole thing and is the driving force behind it. She took on board some musicians to fill the content of the series, and that was Tabea Schwarz, myself, and we then asked also Elizabeth Rumsey to be part of the planning team. We started in 2020, right when the pandemic struck, so the first few concerts we had to move or cancel, because of course we couldn't play, we couldn't perform.
Or to be streamed. There's a lot of concerts that were
at some point. Well, in the summer of 2020 we could finally start playing again live. That's when we then actually started 3 months later.
On the beginning there was nothing.
It didn't work, and at some point, of course, the restrictions grew stronger again, and we could not admit public again. And that was the moment where we actually started live streaming so that we could continue. We got great support by funding bodies. I mean, it's all on there and on our homepage. So many people and foundations, and also the city of Basel and the Historische Museum,
which is so beautiful. It's incredible
that we can play in the Barfüßerkirche. Is absolutely a privilege, right in the heart of Basel, in the middle of Basel.
To talk a little bit about lute, is there like a specific genre in the medieval Renaissance that you identify yourself more? Maybe like the German music because of your research?
It's of course my German studies that pull me towards German repertoires more. But I can't say that I like it more than other things. It's just that I sometimes have a bit more expertise there because I understand the text also very well and try to figure out how that sort of music works, which sometimes can come across a bit more angular than maybe French or Italian repertoires, especially in the 15th or 14th centuries. But I can't really say that I have like one genre that I really prefer much. It's going in phases. Sometimes I'm really working on early 16th century stuff. At some point I turn my back and go to earlier medieval repertoires. I've always been pretty much an ensemble player. So my focus is not so much on a soloistic career. That's not really my interest. I like to play together with people. So even the most lutey of my recordings is a duo. So that I find that interests me personally most, to play in an ensemble, to find a place within a polyphonic ensemble, or accompanying a singer or something like that. But also I feel that this was the most important task of a lutenist in the medieval times. Not specifically to be a soloist, but to play in small. I mean, these ensembles are small. In small ensembles, we're speaking 2 people, 3 people, 4 maybe. So when I say ensemble, I don't mean a big orchestra. I mean just with a few other people to work together. That's my main interest and focus. So in that sense, the work at the Schola is also great, because it's constantly ensemble work that we're doing. There's a bit of solo work that we're doing with the lutenists, of course, but I'm always trying to bring them into contact and into context with other players, performers. Could be other lutenists, but also completely other instruments.
Yeah, because like you said, like there's medieval music, there's no very specific music written for the lute. Yeah. So this ensemble work, it's mainly, we're talking about vocal music that's also played with instruments. So this kind of ensemble work makes a lot of sense, also according to the repertoire.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. So you can always do something soloistically. Yeah, that's absolutely, and I always do that in every program. I have something where I play a bit of lute solo, which is absolutely nice. But the main work really is ensemble work.
About the intabulations, this is something medieval. I'm not very experienced, but like, do you think the intabulations, or at least 16th century? In my experience, there's a lot of intabulations that are extremely difficult to play, historical intabulations, and sometimes much more difficult than Ricercare o Fantasia from the same composer. Do you think at some point, of course this is a very broad question, but that at some point the intabulations were meant to learn the polyphony, to learn the original polyphony, vocal polyphony, not necessarily to play everything, or not? If it was intabulated, you try to play everything, and there are some parts, some specific pieces there, it's even like physically impossible to play all the notes.
Okay, I think we need to really discern what the function of each piece, or even each publication, if it's a publication or manuscript, was. So if we are talking about some early 16th century lute manuscripts, they often were very personal versions. And if there's something a bit weird or strange, it may cater to the possibilities of an individual player. Maybe someone had a very idiomatic own version that they could play, or didn't write everything out that they actually played. And then the version that we're looking at sometimes can seem weird or difficult to play or illogical, but maybe made perfect sense when that person played it. So that's those manuscripts often are very personal, I believe, and maybe don't tell us the whole story. So not everything is written down that needs to be done. And with the prints, with the publications, I would agree. I could imagine that there was a bit of a mix in there. There's some pieces that are very idiomatic to the lute and are very well placed on the instrument. And then there may be other pieces that were included mainly because there's a large composer behind it. So say there's an intabulation of a Josquin piece or something like that, that the printer may have said, put in some Josquin cells. And then the intabulator maybe said, okay, give me the music, I'll set it on the lute. And that is then more a mechanical process, maybe, you just put very effective way to write polyphony in very small amount of paper. You put all the voices together, you place them on the fingerboard, and it's all there. And then when you try to play, you go like, oh boy, boy, no.
Yeah.
And then to make it idiomatic, you would probably strike a few notes, add something else, add a little run, zoom out, make it slower, you make it idiomatic, and then you end up with something completely different. Like Hans Neusiedler. Those intabulations are fantastic, also very difficult to play, but they are very idiomatic. You get runs in between, and the intabulation becomes a lute piece. It's not an intabulation of the vocal music in order to understand the vocal piece. Of course, you appropriate that vocal piece for yourself on the instrument, but you're also making it then an idiomatic lute piece.
Yeah.
And other intabulations are more like, I think what you say, that they are more like trying to either sell the polyphony of a famous composer in the print, or to understand and appropriate music that otherwise you could only hear when the chapel are singing that.
Yes.
So it's very exclusive music that you couldn't have at home at the time, and you couldn't reproduce at home. But everybody at that time who was someone who had enough money owned a lute. So in a sense, I guess the lute was the CD player or MP3 player of the 16th century. People could take home the music that otherwise would be unreachable for them, and play it or understand it on the lute. And they could then make their own versions, cross out some notes that are impossible to play.
Yeah.
But in essence, the whole music is there.
Yeah.
I guess that's the function of many of the tablatures.
Exactly. Well, the tablature was a very effective way and very to write polyphony.
As you say, it's also space efficient.
Space efficient.
Absolutely. I've never really thought about that aspect, but absolutely true.
Yeah.
Of course, the one repertoire is conceived with the instrument in hand. So on the instrument, while the other one is a process that more intellectual process that brings
completely
that polyphony on the instrument, and it's completely a really different process of conceiving the music. No?
That's
why we love the Ritschika so much, no? isn't it? Because it's so done for the instrument and on the instrument.
Exactly. It was intended for that instrument. No, it's completely true. And what makes also, when you find an intabulation that works so well on the lute, then you see also like that was very well done. That works so well. And sometimes another intabulation with more notes doesn't sound as good because it becomes so complicated.
Very well said.
That sometimes just to play all the notes, it doesn't sound as free, as beautiful as the other one.
It's not the point, really, I think, when you make an intabulation of being able to put all the notes that were in the original on your instrument, but to boil down the essence of the original polyphony and bring it in such a way that when you hear it on the lute, you have the feeling nothing's missing.
Exactly.
And that's an art in itself, to understand where can I leave something out and what can I emphasize to give the impression we are listening to polyphony, even though we are not.
We're not,
And it becomes even more virulent when you do that with a plectrum lute. You probably know that we are playing also polyphony soloistically with a plectrum instrument. So you can play 2-voice, 3-voice polyphony with a plectrum if you are prepared to also occasionally use a finger. That's why I have the fingernails to make them to approach the sound more closely of the plectrum that I'm using. And that's a technique that Crawford really developed further and taught to his students, and something that we can also find a bit in iconography. I dedicated a small chapter in the dissertation to that idea. Is this a modern concept, or do we find historical evidence for that kind of playing? And there must have been an intermediate period towards the middle of the 15th century where they actually did that, and we have some evidence, some tablatures and images that show that apparently also fingers were used additionally to the plectrum occasionally. And then you need to, if you make an intabulation with that sort of technique, you need to adapt it even further. Because when you have a plectrum, you're mainly inclined to play neighboring strings. If you want to play more than one note at the same time, you're inclined to strike with a plectrum, lauten schlagen, strike, and use neighboring strings mainly, 2 or 3 or 4. But if the polyphony forces you to bridge strings over, where you normally would pluck 2 strings outside or so, what do? So you have 3 possibilities. Either you also fret the intermediate strings, and they did that. We have the Wolfenbüttel lute tablature here, does exactly that. So if there is a tenor note and a cantus note, if you have 2 voice polyphony that you want to play, you need to play these at the same time, but there are strings in between. The tablature shows that they are fretting the intermediate strings to make a chord out of it, and the chord starts with a tenor note and ends with a discant note. So you merely strike through all of them.
Amazing.
Intermediate strings. The second method, which they also use, is that you play them one after the other. You first you sort the rhythms in such a way that you first play the tenor note and then the discantus with some ornamentation to hide the fact that you can't play them at the same time.
Like a ba partita on the violin.
So you're kind of you use rhythms effectively, and that again becomes something idiomatic for the instrument.
Or you use
and this is the conceived method, that you actually play the low note, the tenor note, with a plectrum, and the high note you pluck with a finger or fingernail at the same time. And usually in these intabulations you need to do that, only very rarely. I've counted the instances when you're really forced to do that, rather than, and what you sometimes can do is you can place them on neighboring strings with some fretting, but sometimes that's an
becomes
effort
too complicated.
Like, it's actually easier to do that. So there are only very few instances where you actually need to do that. It's only for those few moments where you flash out a finger and add that. And when you're using that technique, again, what you need to do in order to make an intabulation deals with even more restrictions to make it idiomatic. And again, that's the process that we're trying to do and work out.
Yeah. Have you ever occurred to you to with plectrum lute is even more I think compelling to do it, but to try to find inspiration in guitar players, electro guitar players.
Oh yeah, absolutely, and and oud players, or we
oud
have
players,
other
exactly.
Instruments.
Here in Basel, we have an incredible oud player, Nehad, which is
it's fantastic, of course.
Fantastic.
So we can also look at their techniques and take on board certain things. And I must say, in teaching, occasionally a student comes up with something or shows some. I'm always doing it like this, and I go like, "Oh, that's a good idea."
Yeah, exactly.
I'm gonna steal that one.
Yeah.
So it does happen also in teaching situations that it's turned around occasionally, and that I take something on board, an idea that someone has, and I go like, "That's a good idea."
I was talking with some friends, and this was already a topic in some videos here, that the electrical guitar, it's unlike the guitar world, the electrical guitar world is still something very free, in a way that in classical guitar you have now like established way of doing it, like schools of doing it, but with electric guitar, even talking to jazz players friends when they go to a jazz school or formation, they mainly talk like technique's not a big part of it. You're talking about the music, the language, and how to do it, and you kind of find your way to do it. And with YouTube now and the amount of electric guitar players that we have in the world, sometimes you find stuff that, just because there is not a traditional way of doing, there's people coming up with ways of doing things that are incredible. They're always different. And the way of using the pick, the type of pick, if you're using like parallel this angle, and if you're using other fingers also together, if you're not using a pick, if you're using the fingers like Mark Knopfler, he doesn't use picks, or Brian May uses a coin, or this kind of things that Wes Montgomery used the thumb to do figetta, like he used the thumb.
It's crazy.
And you hear the recording, and it's not possible that he's only using his thumb to do this. And this is the kind of thing that I think you can very easily, with some restrictions, do a parallel with medieval, like everybody was doing their way, of doing their own music. And I'm sure they came up with several different ways of doing stuff. And in the end, they did what worked for them.
Surely.
Yeah.
I think there is some... Absolutely. Especially when we're trying to recover or rediscover techniques for certain repertoires or instruments that are beyond our reach, so to speak. We need to be creative to find good solutions. I could, however, also imagine that back then they had strong traditions of teaching, that a teacher taught a certain way and the students would imitate that exactly. But that could be very different to what another teacher would do.
Yeah.
And we need also to discern between the different lute-like instruments. So what a citole player did might have been very different with a plectrum from what a lute player would have
different
done.
types of strings, tensions, and that
Also
everything.
plectrums.
Plectrums.
Could have been a bone plectrum, could have been bird's feather, and every plectrum material or stiffness, strength...
It's completely different.
Reacts differently.
Absolutely.
So to keep an open mind there is absolutely good and essential. And many people are now working on it. I've talked to Bor a bit, who's also coming up, I think. You can cut that out if you didn't want a spoiler.
It's okay. People can know.
But and he showed me some of the things that he's been experimenting with, and I thought that's fantastic. There's again
with
the
harp the fretting lute. How do you the buzzing lute? Buzzing lute.
That, but also with plectrums, certain plectrums that you use, and that's also all very helpful. I find. Because and a Peregrina, for instance, he's using other techniques yet again that are for certain parts of medieval music I find absolutely compelling and go wow, that really works well on the gittern with an estampi or estampito. So
he doesn't put the little finger on the soundboard so do we need to? Well, in medieval, I don't know how established is that already in previous centuries.
We find it in the 15th century often. One finger, two finger, three fingers on the on the board, even with one finger plucking or with a plectrum, but also not without. We find everything. We find it all. We find a clasp hand, and I use that for certain instruments. I have an earlier cithara type, which is a 9th century instrument. So we're going really beyond everything where we know anything. But there, I'm using a clasp hand position as well. Something different. You need more force.
Like a nude.
Yeah, almost like a nude. I'll lead it through here. I use parchment as a plectrum, a parchment plectrum.
Wow.
And I use that different. You need a bit more force. I use it differently than when I'm playing diminutions or polyphony. So it's really
completely different.
On, what type of lute? What type of repertoire? Is it monophony? Is it polyphony?
Have you ever tried like this kind of modern technique, like I don't know, with electric guitar, like sweep picking, this kind of things, like when you pick, like when you're doing like a scale and you do, instead of alternating, you go the same direction and then
and some students bring that up also, which is great, which is very good, and I'm trying it a bit myself. I always did the alternating school, down up, no matter in which direction, but also with hammer-ons and pull-offs. I think that's absolutely valid. But also in the same direction for string crossings is very interesting in certain circumstances. I wouldn't use it for everything, but for certain repertoires and circumstances, this is a very good idea, I think.
Okay.
I need to try that more. So I still have things to learn there. And Peregrina just lately showed me something which I need to practice a bit more, which is very good.
Now you mentioned a topic that's very interesting and it also caused a little bit of debates of pull-offs and hammer-ons. Like I've always heard at least 16th century, that was always my earlier limit. We should not do pull-offs and hammer-ons. Like when I like not ornament likes. I mean like you would do in Kapsberger or Piccinini. That would be the earliest documentation we would have, like for sure that they wrote this, that okay, this is hammer-ons. What do you say about that? It's or in earlier repertoire, like do you have some kind of evidence, or you just assume that they probably did it? Like
we don't have evidence for that, and I'm thinking of situations where we're playing diminutions or an estampita or something that we're putting on an instrument, and we don't even know if they put it on that instrument. Was the piece conceived with a certain instrument in mind, or was this an open musical text, something that someone could sing or play on the fiddle or play on the lute or play on the gittern? And depending on which instrument, in which tuning, at which pitch level or transposition you put it, it really something else happens in the left or right hand. No? Do you have a string crossing or not? And the main thing for me is to develop a technique that you can portray the musical text that you want to portray in a way that it sounds easy and unproblematic. And if there's a certain ornamental gesture that goes across a string, and you use a certain type of pull-off to manage it fluently so that no extra emphasis is put in that place that you don't want to have, then that is working for me. Or you leave it out because it's in this place too complicated to make to sound easy, to sound fluent. So I think that sort of open text is absolutely what we're working with at that time.
Okay.
Because if we're looking at that musical notation, that it was not specifically done for the lute, and if we're putting it on the lute,
I understand.
Think they did it, then they surely adapted it in such a way that they can play it well.
I understand. Of course, we cannot say it was like this, it was like that. We cannot say that, but it's like the same thing. If you take a tablature that's no forte or piano written, should you play everything the same? Should you not change the tempo whatsoever? Should you always play like because it's not written? You can say the same thing for articulation. And until when do you draw the line or not? In the end, the music should be the ultimate. The musical idea should be the ultimate.
Agreed.
I don't know. I think we are going more and more to the non-fundamentalist approach.
I think what we should not do is cast away what we know about, what we know about technique, what we know about the repertoire and the musical aesthetics of the time. I think they are absolutely important to inform what we're doing.
Exactly.
But that's all background knowledge, and once you're out on the stage, you rely on your musical guts, which have been informed before by all that studying. But that's not something that you carry forward into the performance. This is something which for me is the solid ground on which I stand when I perform, but it's not something that I try to present and show. Because then you're a musical personality. On stage you're the musical personality, which does not mean that you haven't done all the proper channels, all the proper work beforehand. I think that's the process through which we go, and then the result is being presented on stage, and then it should be sprezzatura, it should be light and just you speaking that language that you've learned before. So I think agreed. And then things can happen. Things can happen that maybe were not learned, but which are part of your musical personality.
It's a temporal event. Things are going to happen. Thank you very much, Marc. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Guillaume.
I'm very happy. And see you next time.
See you next time. Bye.